The first thing Bruno Mars noticed that night was not the screaming crowd, the thousands of phone screens glowing like stars, or even the thousands of voices singing every word back to him. It was a woman crying silently in the front section. It was 10:47 p.m. on a fictional Saturday night in October 2026, inside the fictional Pacific Crown Arena in Los Angeles, California, and Bruno had just begun the final stretch of his encore when something in the audience made him stop smiling. The woman was sitting in a wheelchair, just a few feet beyond the security barrier. Her hands covered her face, her shoulders shaking as she tried desperately to keep her emotions under control. Beside her stood a man who looked old enough to be her father. He kept one hand on the back of her chair and the other inside his jacket pocket. Bruno watched him glance toward security, then toward the woman, then back toward the stage. Something was wrong. Bruno had seen fans cry before. He had seen people overwhelmed by the music, proposals happen in the crowd, people reunited with loved ones, fans holding signs about difficult moments in their lives. But this felt different. The woman's crying wasn't excitement. It was grief. Bruno slowly lowered his microphone. The band continued playing for another 2 seconds before he raised one hand. The drummer stopped. The guitarist froze. The lights settled over the audience. Nearly 25,000 people suddenly realized something had changed. A wave of silence moved through the arena. Bruno looked toward the front row. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" The woman looked up. Her eyes were red. She tried to smile, but it disappeared almost immediately. Bruno leaned toward the edge of the stage. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering.
Elena. Bruno nodded. Elena.
He smiled gently. "What's going on?" Elena looked at the man beside her. He was staring at the floor. Bruno followed her eyes and noticed an empty seat directly beside her wheelchair. On that seat sat a folded piece of paper. Bruno pointed toward it. "Is that for me?" Elena didn't answer. The man finally spoke. "Yeah." Bruno looked at him. "Who wrote it?" The man's face tightened. "Her brother."
Bruno paused.
"Where is he?" The man looked at Elena. Elena closed her eyes. The man took a slow breath. "He's gone." Bruno's expression changed immediately. He didn't ask another question. He simply looked at Elena and nodded. Then he stepped down from the stage. The crowd gasped as security moved forward, but Bruno held up his hand. "It's okay." He walked closer to the barrier until he was only a few feet away from Elena. She looked at him with tears running down her cheeks. Bruno crouched slightly. "I'm sorry," he said.
Elena nodded.
"He loved your music." Bruno looked toward the empty seat. "What's his name?" "Daniel." Bruno repeated it quietly. "Daniel." Then he looked at the paper again. "Can I see that?" Elena looked at her father. The man reached into his jacket, took the folded note, and slowly handed it toward the security guard. The guard passed it to a stage assistant, who walked it toward Bruno. Bruno unfolded the paper. There were only 8 words written across it. He read them once, then again. His eyes stopped moving. "Daniel promised her you'd sing this song." Bruno looked up. "What song?" Elena whispered the title. Bruno's face changed. He knew the song, but it wasn't on the set list that night. He turned toward his band. The musicians looked back at him. They had not rehearsed it for the show. The crowd was still completely silent. Bruno turned back to Elena. "You came here because of him?"
Elena nodded.
"He was supposed to come with me." Her voice broke. "But he didn't make it." Bruno took a breath.
I'm sorry.
Elena wiped her face. "He told me we'd be here together."
Bruno nodded slowly.
"Then let's make sure you don't leave without hearing it." The crowd erupted in applause, but Bruno raised his hand again. "Not yet." He looked at Elena. "Only if you're okay with it." Elena stared at him for several seconds. Then she nodded. "Okay."
Bruno smiled.
"Okay." He stepped back toward the stage, but before he could turn around, Elena reached out and touched his hand. Bruno stopped. She whispered, "He would have been so happy." Bruno looked at her. "Sounds like he was a good brother." Elena smiled through tears. "He was." Bruno gently squeezed her hand before standing. Then he turned toward the band. "Let's figure this out." The musicians gathered around their instruments. The keyboard player looked at the song structure. The guitarist quietly checked the chords. The drummer leaned toward the others. The crowd watched every movement. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone could feel that something unusual had taken over the concert. Bruno walked back to the microphone. "We're going to do something a little different." The crowd cheered. Bruno smiled, but his expression remained serious. This wasn't on the set list. He looked toward Elena. But sometimes the most important songs aren't. The audience responded with another wave of applause. Elena covered her mouth. Her father placed both hands on her shoulders. Bruno looked down at the empty chair beside her. "That seat," he said. Elena looked at him. "Was that supposed to be Daniel's?" She nodded. Bruno lowered his voice. "Then we're going to leave it right there." Elena stared at him. The empty chair suddenly seemed to carry an entire history. It wasn't just a chair. It was a promise that hadn't been kept. A brother who should have been sitting there. A night that was supposed to belong to two people but had become something else entirely. Bruno returned to the center of the stage. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight rested over Elena and the empty seat. The arena became so quiet that Elena could hear her own breathing. Bruno looked toward the band. The keyboard played the first chord. Elena closed her eyes, and for a few seconds, everything seemed to disappear. But this wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the moment when everyone finally realized there was a story at all. 3 hours earlier, Elena had entered the arena with no intention of becoming part of the show. She had wanted to sit quietly, listen to the music, and go home with one memory of Daniel. She had told her father not to tell anyone about the reason she was there. She didn't want security to make a big deal about her wheelchair. She didn't want strangers staring at her. She didn't want anyone saying they were sorry. Most of all, she didn't want Bruno Mars to know how much the night meant to her. But Daniel had always been good at making plans she didn't understand. Even after he was gone, he seemed to be doing it. Elena had spent the entire afternoon trying to convince herself that coming to the concert was a good idea. She almost canceled twice. The first time was at 2:15 p.m., when she found Daniel's old jacket hanging in the hallway closet. The jacket still smelled faintly like the cologne he wore. She stood there for several minutes with her hand on the sleeve. Her father found her. "You don't have to go," he said. Elena shook her head. "I know. We can stay home." She looked at him. No, her father waited. "Why?"
Elena swallowed.
"Because he wanted me to go." Her father didn't argue. He simply helped her get ready. At 5:40 p.m., they left the house. The drive to the arena was quiet. Elena watched the city lights through the window. Every few minutes, she checked the ticket on her phone. She had 2 tickets. One was hers. The other had Daniel's name attached to it. She refused to delete it. Her father noticed. "You want to change the name?" he asked. "No, okay." A few minutes later, Elena said, "Do you think this is stupid?" "What?" "Going without him." Her father looked at her through the rearview mirror. "No, it feels wrong." "Why?" "Because this was supposed to be ours." Her father was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe it still is." Elena looked out the window again. She didn't know what he meant. When they arrived at the arena, thousands of people were already lining up. Some wore glittering jackets. Some carried signs. Some were singing. Others were taking pictures. Elena watched them with a strange mixture of happiness and sadness. Everyone seemed to be arriving with someone. Couples, friends, families, brothers and sisters. Elena looked at the empty seat beside her in the car and imagined Daniel sitting there, making some ridiculous joke about how early they had arrived. She smiled for the first time that day. "What?" her father asked. "Nothing. You're smiling." He would have complained about parking. Her father laughed. "Definitely." They entered the arena at 7:32 p.m. The halls were filled with music and conversation. Staff directed them toward the accessible seating area. Elena immediately noticed the empty seat beside her. Daniel's seat. Her father had arranged for it to remain empty. He could have asked someone to take it, but he didn't. Elena appreciated that. She didn't want a stranger sitting there. She wanted one night where Daniel still had a place. As the opening act finished, the arena lights began to dim. Elena felt her heart pounding. She whispered, "I wish he were here." Her father squeezed her shoulder. I know. The first notes hung in the air, soft and uncertain, as if even the musicians understood that this was no longer an ordinary encore. Bruno stood beneath a single white spotlight, one hand resting lightly on the microphone, while Elena stared at the empty seat beside her. For a moment, she couldn't move. The entire arena seemed to be waiting with her. Her father, Michael, kept one hand on her shoulder, but he didn't say anything. He knew there were some moments when words only made things harder. Bruno glanced toward his band, then back at Elena. We're gonna take this slow, he said. No pressure. Elena nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on that empty chair. The first verse began. Bruno sang quietly, almost conversationally, allowing the melody to breathe between each line. Elena recognized every note. Daniel had played this song so many times that she could almost hear his voice underneath Bruno's. She remembered sitting beside him in their parents' living room when they were teenagers. Daniel had been 16, Elena 12, and neither of them had enough money to buy the album they wanted. So Daniel had recorded the song from the radio onto an old cassette tape. The recording had been terrible. There was static. The radio host talked over the beginning. Halfway through, someone in the kitchen dropped a plate. But Daniel loved it anyway. This is our song, he had said. Elena had laughed. Why? Because I said so. That's not a reason. It is when you're older. She hadn't understood then. She understood now. Bruno reached the chorus, and the crowd began singing softly with him. Elena lowered her head. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Michael noticed and whispered, You know the words. Elena shook her head. I can't. You can. Dad. He squeezed her shoulder. You don't have to. She looked toward Bruno. The singer had noticed her again. He didn't point her out. He didn't ask her to sing. He simply continued. That small gesture meant more to Elena than any speech could have. She could cry. She could stay quiet. She could simply listen. She didn't have to perform her grief for anyone. As the song continued, Bruno's eyes moved across the audience. But every few seconds they returned to Elena. He saw the way she kept touching the empty seat. He saw the way Michael watched her instead of the stage. And he began to understand that Daniel wasn't simply someone Elena had lost. He had been the person who helped her survive the hardest years of her life. The song ended with a long instrumental passage. The crowd remained quiet. Bruno lowered his microphone. What's your brother's full name? He asked. Elena looked up. Daniel Carter.
Bruno nodded.
How old was he? 28. Bruno's expression softened. 28. He repeated the number slowly, almost as if trying to imagine the person behind it. What happened? Michael looked at Elena.
Elena hesitated.
She had spent months answering that question from doctors, relatives, friends, and strangers. She hated it every time. But something about Bruno's voice made it feel less like an interrogation and more like an invitation. He got sick, she said.
Bruno nodded.
Suddenly? Yeah. Elena took a breath. He didn't know at first. None of us did. Bruno remained silent. Elena continued. By the time we understood what was happening, there wasn't much anyone could do. Michael lowered his eyes.
Bruno nodded slowly.
I'm really sorry.
Elena smiled faintly.
He hated when people said that. Bruno raised an eyebrow. Why? He said it made him sound like a tragedy.
Bruno smiled.
Sounds like he had a personality.
Elena laughed softly.
He did. For the first time since Bruno had stopped the music, Elena laughed. It wasn't much, but it changed the atmosphere. A few people in the crowd smiled.
Bruno noticed.
Tell me something about him that isn't sad. Elena looked surprised. What? Something funny. She thought for a second. He couldn't cook.
Bruno looked.
At all. He once burned cereal. The crowd laughed. Bruno leaned toward the microphone. How do you burn cereal? Elena shook her head. I don't know. He found a way. Michael laughed too. He set off the smoke alarm making toast.
Bruno grinned.
Okay. Now I like this guy.
Elena smiled.
He would have liked you.
Bruno nodded.
I would have liked him too. The crowd applauded softly. Then Bruno looked at the empty chair. Was that his seat?
Elena nodded.
He was supposed to sit there. Bruno took a breath. Then I'm glad you kept it. Elena looked down. I didn't know what else to do.
Bruno nodded.
Sometimes that's enough. He turned toward the band. Let's keep going. The musicians started another gentle progression, but Bruno didn't immediately sing. He let the crowd settle.
Elena listened.
The music brought back another memory. It was 6 months earlier, before Daniel became seriously ill, when he had called her after work. You busy? He had asked.
No.
What's up? I need a favor. How much money? Wow. He had laughed. You don't even know what I need. You're my brother. It's usually money. I need you to promise me something. Elena had become suspicious. What? If I get you tickets to that concert, you'll go. What concert? Don't play dumb.
Bruno.
Yes. You hate concerts. I hate crowds. Same thing.
No.
One is music. One is people. She had laughed. Okay. If you get tickets, I'll go. Daniel paused. Promise. Promise. Good. She didn't know that would be the last time they talked about the concert while he was healthy. 3 weeks later, he started feeling exhausted. Then came the appointments. Then tests. Then more tests. Then the diagnosis. Everything moved too quickly. Elena remembered sitting beside him in a hospital room while he stared at the ceiling. You still owe me that concert, she had said. Daniel smiled. I'm working on it. What does that mean? It means stop asking questions. Daniel, trust me. He always said that. Trust me. At the time, she had thought he was joking. Now she wondered whether he had already known how little time he had. Bruno finished the second verse and looked toward Elena again. Did he know about the tickets?
Elena nodded.
He bought them.
Bruno smiled.
Then he kept his promise. Elena looked at the empty seat. He didn't get to. Bruno shook his head gently. You did. Elena didn't answer. Bruno continued. Sometimes keeping a promise doesn't mean both people get to stand in the same room. Elena looked at him. What does it mean?
Bruno smiled.
It means you show up anyway. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Michael looked toward Bruno and nodded. The crowd remained silent. Then Bruno asked, Did Daniel ever see me perform?
Elena smiled.
No, never. He wanted to.
Bruno looked softly.
Well, that's a problem. Elena looked confused. Bruno turned toward the band. Then we better make tonight count. The musicians laughed. The tension eased again. But behind the smiles, something was happening. Bruno had begun to suspect there was more to the story than a brother who had bought concert tickets. The note had been too carefully written. The empty seat had been preserved. And Elena had reacted to Daniel's name like she was carrying an unfinished conversation inside her. Bruno looked toward Michael. Did Daniel leave anything else? Michael hesitated. Elena immediately noticed. Dad. Michael looked at her. What? You know something. Michael shook his head. No, Elena stared at him. Dad. It's nothing. You were holding something when Bruno stopped the show. Michael looked away. Elena's voice became softer. What were you holding? Michael didn't answer. Bruno noticed the tension and stepped back from the conversation. You don't have to talk about it here. Elena looked at him. I need to know. Michael sighed. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Elena stared at it. What's that? Something Daniel gave me. When? Michael swallowed. The day before he died. Elena's face went pale. The crowd couldn't hear what they were saying now, but Bruno could see the change in her expression. He quietly asked the band to hold. The arena fell silent again. Elena looked at her father. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know when. When? When you were ready. Elena stared at the envelope. I am ready. Michael looked down. I don't think anyone is ever ready. Elena reached for it. Michael didn't give it to her. Not yet. She frowned. Why? Because he asked me to wait. For what? Michael looked toward Bruno. Until you heard the song. Elena's breath caught. Bruno looked at Michael. The crowd remained completely still. He told you to give it to me after the song? Elena asked. Michael nodded. After you heard it live. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Why? I don't know. Dad, you knew? I knew he was planning something. What? Michael shook his head. He didn't tell me. Elena stared at the little boy as if the entire arena had suddenly gone silent again. What did you say? She asked. The boy looked nervous now. He glanced at his mother, then at his father. The man Elena had just learned was named David. David had gone completely still. His face had lost its color, and for several seconds he didn't seem to know what to say. Bruno noticed the change immediately. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage but didn't interrupt. Elena's father, Michael, whispered, David. David looked at him.
I'm sorry.
You need to explain, Michael said. David swallowed. I know. Elena tightened her grip around Daniel's letter. Explain what? David looked at her, then at the boy. Daniel asked me to bring my son tonight. Elena's eyebrows pulled together. Why? Because he wanted you to meet him. Why would my brother want me to meet your son? David hesitated. Because Daniel thought you might need someone who understood. Elena shook her head. Understood what? David looked down. What it's like to lose someone. Elena stared at him. That doesn't explain anything. David took a slow breath. You're right. Bruno finally spoke. Maybe we should move somewhere quieter. Elena looked at him. She didn't want to leave. Somehow, the stage had become the only place where the truth seemed close enough to touch. She shook her head.
Non.
I want to know.
Bruno nodded.
Okay. David stepped closer to the barrier. Daniel called me 4 weeks before he died. Elena looked at him. Why? He said he needed a favor. What kind? David reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He sent me a voice message. Elena's breathing stopped for a second. You still have it? David nodded. I never deleted it. Michael looked at him sharply. You told me you didn't have anything. David looked embarrassed. I didn't think I should play it. Elena's voice became quieter. Play it. David hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. David unlocked his phone. The arena was so quiet that Elena could hear the faint tapping of his fingers against the screen. He found the message. For a moment, no one moved. Then Daniel's voice came through the phone speaker. It was ordinary, warm, familiar. Elena hadn't heard it in months. Hey David, it's me. I know this is weird, but I need you to do something for me. Elena covered her mouth. Her father's eyes filled with tears. Daniel continued. If everything goes the way the doctors think it might, I need you to take Evan to the concert. I need you to make sure Elena goes too. Elena's eyes widened. Why? Daniel's recorded voice continued. Don't tell her why. Don't tell her about this message. She'll probably get mad at me anyway. David smiled sadly. He knew you. Elena almost laughed through her tears. Daniel continued. There's a seat next to her. Leave it empty. She'll understand later. The message paused. There was a faint sound of breathing. Then Daniel said, and if she asks you why, tell her I wanted her to hear the song. Elena looked at the stage. Bruno was listening carefully. Daniel's voice continued. But that's not the real reason. The recording stopped. David looked at Elena. There was more, he said. Elena stared at him. Play it. David hesitated. The rest is difficult. Play it. He pressed the screen. Daniel's voice returned. The real reason is that I need Elena to remember that she's not broken. Elena's eyes closed. Daniel continued. She's going to think the accident took everything from her. She's going to think I'm leaving and taking the last good part of her life with me. Don't let her believe that. Elena's shoulders began shaking. Tell her she's still the same person. Tell her she still has music. Tell her she still has people. And if she won't listen to you, maybe she'll listen to a room full of 25,000 strangers. David stopped the recording. No one spoke. Bruno lowered his eyes. Elena looked at Michael. He knew. Michael nodded. Yes. He knew I thought I was broken. Her father stepped closer. We all knew. Elena looked at him. Why didn't you tell me? Michael's voice cracked. Because every time I tried, you shut down. I was grieving. I know. I lost my brother. I know. Then why did everyone keep making plans for me? Michael looked at her for a long moment. Because Daniel asked us to. Elena looked at Daniel's letter. Suddenly, the paper felt heavier than it had a minute earlier. Bruno quietly stepped down from the stage and approached the barrier again. He didn't touch Elena. He simply stood nearby. Can I ask you something?
Elena nodded.
Did you stop playing music after the accident? Elena looked surprised. How did you know? Bruno glanced at the letter. Daniel mentioned it? David shook his head.
No.
He didn't mention that in the recording. Elena looked down. I used to play piano.
Bruno smiled.
Used to. I stopped. Why? She hesitated. My hands changed. She lifted them slightly. I couldn't play the way I used to.
Bruno nodded.
So you stopped because it wasn't perfect anymore? Elena looked at him. Pretty much.
Bruno smiled softly.
That's a shame.
Elena frowned.
Why? Because music doesn't care if you're perfect. She stared at him. Easy for you to say.
Bruno looked quietly.
Fair. Then he looked toward his band. I mess up all the time. A few musicians laughed. Bruno pointed at the guitarist. He'll tell you. The guitarist nodded. Absolutely. Elena smiled despite herself. The crowd laughed softly. The tension eased. But then David said, Daniel knew you'd say that. Elena looked at him. What? He told me Bruno would probably say something like that. Bruno raised an eyebrow. He knew me pretty well for someone who never met me. David nodded. He watched everything you did. Elena laughed through her tears. Of course he did. David smiled. He said you were the only person he knew who could make a concert feel like a room full of friends. Bruno looked down. That's a nice thing to say. Elena looked at the stage. He meant it.
Bruno nodded.
Then let's honor it. He turned toward the band. One more song. The musicians prepared, but Elena shook her head. Wait. Bruno stopped. What? Elena held up the letter. There's something else. She unfolded it. Her hands were steadier now. The letter says there was something Dad never told me. Michael looked away. Elena read the next line. He says, Dad thinks you need to know the truth about the night of the accident. Michael's face changed. Bruno looked at him. David looked at him too. Elena stared at her father. What truth? Michael said nothing. Dad.
Elena.
What truth? He closed his eyes. I didn't want you to know. Know what? The accident wasn't your fault. Elena's face went still. I know. No. Michael said quietly. You don't. Elena looked confused. What are you talking about? Michael stepped closer. You spent 3 years believing you caused it. Because I was driving. You were driving because Daniel asked you to.
Elena froze.
What? Michael looked at the empty seat. That night, Daniel was supposed to drive. Elena stared at him. No. He gave you the keys. No. He told you to drive because he was tired. Elena shook her head. I don't remember. You were exhausted. You had been awake for almost 20 hours. The doctors said your memory was affected. Elena's breathing became faster. Why didn't you tell me? Michael's eyes filled with tears. Because Daniel told me not to. Why? Because he thought you'd blame yourself even more. Elena looked down. Memories began appearing in fragments. Rain on a windshield. Daniel laughing. Music playing from the speakers. Her hands on the steering wheel. Daniel saying something beside her. Then headlights. Then darkness. She touched her forehead. I remember. Michael stepped closer. What? He told me to slow down. Yes. I said we were almost home. Michael nodded. Yes. Then? Elena stopped. Her face went pale. He reached for the radio. Michael closed his eyes. Yes. I turned to him. Yes. And then the truck. Her voice broke. I remember. Michael reached for her hand.
Elena.
She pulled away. You let me think it was my fault. I know. For 3 years. I know. Why? Michael couldn't answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was barely audible. Because Daniel asked me to protect you from the truth until you were strong enough to hear it. Elena stared at him. And you thought tonight was the right time? No, Michael said. Daniel did. Elena looked toward the empty seat. He planned all this. David nodded. He did. Even the boy? Elena looked at Evan. David smiled. Evan was part of it. The boy stepped forward. The words on the black envelope seemed to glow beneath the arena lights. Elena held it between both hands, staring at the handwriting she had already begun to recognize. He never told you everything. 5 words. Nothing more.
No explanation.
No name. No date. No clue about what was inside. Around her, nearly 25,000 people were still settling back into their seats, unaware that another secret had just appeared in the middle of the night. Bruno stood on stage watching Elena carefully. He had seen the envelope appear, and something about the way she was holding it told him this wasn't part of any concert production. He walked toward the edge of the stage again.
Elena.
She looked up. Yeah. You want me to wait? She stared at the envelope. I don't know.
Bruno nodded.
Then we wait. He turned to the band. Give us a minute. The musicians lowered their instruments. The arena lights softened. Elena looked at her father. Did you know about this? Michael shook his head. No, are you sure? Yes. She looked at David. Did Daniel give you this? No. Elena turned the envelope over. There was no return address. No stamp. No name. Just her first name written in black ink. Who put it here? Michael looked toward security. One of the guards immediately approached. Ma'am, I can check.
Elena nodded.
The guard examined the seat, looked around the surrounding rows, and spoke quietly into his radio. Nobody saw anyone place it. Bruno raised an eyebrow. That's strange. Elena looked at him. Very. She slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a small USB drive and another folded photograph. She pulled out the photograph first. Her hands froze. It showed Daniel standing beside a man Elena didn't recognize. They were outside a building she had never seen before. Daniel was smiling. The unknown man was holding a guitar case. On the back of the photograph was another message. Ask Dad about the blue room. Elena looked at Michael. His face changed instantly. What? She asked. Michael didn't answer. Dad. He stared at the photograph. Where did you get that? It was in the envelope. No, his voice became almost a whisper. I mean, where did he get that photograph? Elena looked at it again. You know this man. Michael closed his eyes. Yes.
Bruno stepped closer.
Who is he? Michael looked toward the empty seat. His name is Richard.
Elena frowned.
Who is Richard? Someone from before. Before what? Michael hesitated. Before Daniel got sick. Elena felt frustration rising. Dad, I am done with people telling me things one piece at a time. Michael nodded. You're right. He looked at Bruno, then back at Elena. Richard was Daniel's music teacher. Elena stared at the photograph. I never heard of him. Because Daniel didn't want you to. Why? Michael took a long breath. Because Richard was the reason Daniel started writing music. Elena looked surprised. Daniel wrote music? Michael nodded. A lot. She shook her head. He never told me. He didn't want you to know. Why? Because he thought you'd make fun of him. Elena laughed despite herself. I would've. Michael smiled sadly. Exactly. Bruno smiled too. Sounds like siblings. Elena looked at the USB drive. What's on this? Michael shook his head. I don't know. She looked toward Bruno. Should I open it? Bruno didn't answer immediately. Only if you're ready for whatever it might contain. Elena stared at the drive. I need to know. Security brought a laptop from backstage. Bruno stepped away while a technician connected the drive. Elena watched the screen. A single video file appeared. No title. No date. Just one word.
Elena.
Her breathing became shallow. Play it. The technician clicked. The screen went black. Then Daniel appeared. He was sitting in a dim room, wearing a gray hoodie. Elena immediately recognized the room. It was their grandmother's old music room. The piano was behind him. Daniel looked directly into the camera. Hey, El. Elena covered her mouth. The arena became silent. Daniel smiled. If you're watching this, then Dad finally gave you the letter. Elena looked at Michael. He lowered his head. Daniel continued. And if he didn't, Then I'm probably haunting him from wherever I am. Elena laughed through tears. Michael shook his head. That sounds like him. Daniel smiled on the screen. I know you're angry. You should be. You probably think Dad kept things from you because he didn't trust you. That's not true. He kept things from you because I asked him to. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Why? Daniel continued. Because after the accident you changed. And I changed too. I watched you blame yourself every day. I watched you stop playing piano. I watched you stop seeing friends. I watched you stop making plans. And I didn't know how to fix it. Elena stared at the screen. Daniel paused. So I made a plan. Elena whispered. Of course you did. Daniel smiled. I found Richard. Michael looked at the photograph. I asked him to help me record something. Daniel continued. I wanted to give you something after I was gone. Not a goodbye. I hated goodbyes. I wanted to give you a beginning. Elena started crying. Daniel's expression softened. You probably think I'm being dramatic.
Elena laughed.
You are. Good. Daniel smiled. Then we're even. The video paused for a second as he looked down. When he looked back up, his eyes were wet. I need you to understand something. The accident didn't take your life. Changed your life. Those aren't the same thing. Elena closed her eyes. You spent 3 years punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. I know because I let you believe it was.
I'm sorry.
Michael's face crumpled. Daniel continued. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid you'd hate me. So I waited, and then I got sick. And suddenly, waiting wasn't an option anymore. Elena reached for her father's hand. He took it. Daniel looked toward the camera. There was one thing I couldn't do myself. He smiled. I couldn't make you play again. The video changed. Daniel was now sitting at the old piano. His hands moved slowly over the keys. The melody was simple. Elena recognized it immediately. It was the song she and Daniel had loved. Daniel played a few notes and stopped. This is yours now. He looked directly at the camera. Not mine. Yours.
Elena sobbed quietly.
Daniel continued. Richard taught me something when I was 17. He said music isn't about making perfect sounds. It's about telling the truth. He smiled. So here's mine. I was scared. I was angry. I didn't want to die. And I hated that I was leaving you. Elena's father looked down. Daniel's voice became softer. But I wasn't afraid of you forgetting me. I was afraid you'd remember me so much that you forgot yourself. Elena stared at the screen. Daniel leaned toward the camera. So promise me one thing. Elena whispered. What? Daniel said. Play. The screen went black. The arena remained silent. No one moved. Even the crowd seemed afraid to breathe. Elena stared at the dark screen. That's it? She whispered. The technician nodded. That's the whole file. Elena shook her head. No, she looked at the USB drive. There has to be more. Michael looked at her. Maybe that's what he wanted. No, she pointed toward the screen. He said play.
Bruno stepped closer.
Maybe that's the point. Elena looked at him. What? Maybe he didn't leave you a finished song. Bruno nodded toward the empty seat. Maybe he left you the first note. Elena looked down at her hands. Her fingers trembled. Bruno asked, Do you still know how to play?
Elena hesitated.
I don't know. There's only one way to find out. Elena looked at him. Here.
Bruno smiled.
Why not? The crowd began murmuring. Elena looked toward the stage. I haven't played in years.
Bruno nodded.
Then nobody expects perfection. He turned toward the band. Can we bring out a keyboard? The keyboard player immediately stood. A stagehand brought a small keyboard to the front of the stage. Bruno looked at Elena. You want to try? Elena stared at it. Fear crossed her face. I can't.
Bruno nodded.
Okay. He didn't push. Then Elena looked at the empty chair. She remembered Daniel sitting beside her years ago, tapping his fingers on the table while she practiced. Again, he had always said, You're rushing. I'm not. You are. You're annoying. Also true. She smiled. Then she looked at Bruno. Okay. The crowd erupted. Bruno held up his hand. Easy. He walked toward the keyboard and pulled a chair beside it.
Elena positioned herself carefully.
Her hands hovered over the keys. She stared at them. What if I can't? Bruno answered quietly. Then we stop. The arena had gone quiet, but Elena could still hear Daniel's voice in her head. The final image on the giant screen had disappeared, leaving only the faint glow of the stage lights and the reflection of thousands of phone screens. For several seconds, nobody moved. Bruno stood a few feet away from Elena, watching her carefully, while Michael remained behind her wheelchair with both hands gripping the handles. David stood beside his son, looking just as confused as everyone else. The message on the screen had promised another part of the truth, but nobody knew where it would come from. Then Elena looked at her father. You said you didn't know. Michael swallowed. I didn't. But you knew something was wrong. Yes. How much? Michael looked down. Not enough. Elena shook her head. Dad, I need the truth. Michael nodded slowly. You deserve it. Bruno stepped back, giving them space. The crowd had become unusually quiet, as if thousands of strangers understood that the concert had turned into something deeply personal. Michael took a long breath. The night of the accident, Daniel called me before you two left. Elena stared at him. What did he say? He said you were arguing. About what? Michael hesitated. About the music.
Elena frowned.
What music? He wanted you to play again. Elena looked away. That sounds like him. Michael continued. You told him you were done with the piano. He said you were quitting because you were afraid. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I remember that. You got angry. I remember. You grabbed the keys and left. Elena whispered. Yes. Michael nodded. Daniel followed you. The memory returned in fragments. Then, headlights, the sound of the windshield wipers, Daniel's voice, her own anger. I was mad at him. I know. He kept talking. I know. I told him to stop. Michael's eyes filled with tears. Yes. Elena stared at the floor. Then what happened? Michael took a breath. The truck crossed the center line. Elena looked up. I remember that. You swerved. Yes. Daniel reached across you. Why? Michael's voice cracked. Because he was trying to protect you. Elena closed her eyes. She remembered the movement. Daniel's arm across her chest. The impact. Glass. Darkness. Then nothing. He didn't grab the wheel, Michael said. He wasn't trying to control the car. Elena looked at him. Then why did I think he did? Michael shook his head. Because you woke up believing you had caused it. Daniel was unconscious. The doctors told us you might have memory gaps. Elena whispered. And you let me believe it. I thought the guilt would eventually fade. It didn't. Michael looked at her. I know. Elena's voice trembled. You should have told me. Yes. She looked away. But Daniel didn't want me to know? Michael nodded. He was afraid you would blame yourself for something else. What? Michael looked toward the empty seat. For surviving.
Elena froze.
The words struck harder than anything else that night. What do you mean? Michael stepped closer. Daniel woke up after the accident. You were still unconscious. He asked me whether you were going to live. Elena stared at him. He knew. Yes. And he knew he might not? Michael nodded. He asked me to promise him something. What? Michael looked directly into her eyes. He asked me to make sure you never believed that his life was worth more than yours.
Elena's face collapsed.
She covered her mouth. Dad? Michael continued. He said if he didn't make it, you would spend the rest of your life thinking you should have been the one who died. Elena shook her head. I did. I know. I thought that. I know. I still think it sometimes. Michael reached toward her hand. This time she let him take it. That's why he made the plan, Michael said. The tickets, the letter, David, Richard, everything. Elena looked at Bruno. Bruno's eyes were wet. He wanted you to understand that surviving wasn't betrayal. Elena looked down at Daniel's photograph. He was always trying to fix me. Michael shook his head. No. He was trying to remind you that you weren't broken. Elena looked at the empty seat. The distinction was small, but somehow it changed everything. Daniel hadn't been trying to rescue her from her grief. He had been trying to give her permission to live with it. Bruno stepped forward. Can I say something?
Elena nodded.
Bruno looked toward the crowd. I think a lot of people understand what she's feeling, even if their stories are different. Thousands of people nodded. Sometimes losing somebody makes you think moving forward means leaving them behind. Bruno continued. It doesn't. He looked at Elena. You can take them with you. The crowd applauded quietly. Elena wiped her eyes. He said something like that.
Bruno smiled.
Sounds like Daniel knew what he was talking about.
Elena laughed softly.
Then she remembered the mysterious video. But what about Richard? She asked. Michael's expression changed. Richard knows the rest. Elena looked at David. Where is he? David shook his head. I don't know. You brought me here knowing all this, but you don't know where he is? David sighed. Daniel told me Richard would come if the time was right. Elena looked around the arena. Maybe he already did. The thought made her uneasy. She looked toward the darkened entrance at the side of the stage. What if he's here? Security immediately checked the area. A few minutes later, one of the staff members approached Bruno and whispered something into his ear. Bruno's eyes widened. He looked toward Elena. There's someone backstage asking for you. Elena's heart stopped. Who?
Bruno hésita-t-elle.
He says his name is Richard. Elena looked at Michael. Her father closed his eyes. I knew he'd come. Bruno turned toward the stage entrance. Do you want to meet him? Elena took a slow breath. Yes. Security opened the side door. An older man walked into the backstage area. He was probably in his late 60s, wearing a dark jacket and carrying an old guitar case. His gray hair was neatly combed, but his face looked tired. He stopped when he saw Elena. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Richard said, You look like your mother. Elena stared at him. You knew my mother? Richard nodded. Years ago. Why didn't I know you? Richard looked toward Michael. Because Daniel wanted it that way. Elena's frustration returned. Everybody keeps saying that. Richard smiled sadly. I know. He placed the guitar case on the floor. Your brother was afraid you would think he was planning your life for you. Wasn't he? Richard laughed softly. Maybe. Then his expression became serious. But he was trying to give you choices. Elena looked at the guitar case. What's in there? Richard opened it. Inside was an old acoustic guitar. Elena recognized it immediately. That's Daniel's. Richard nodded. He gave it to me. Why? Because he couldn't take it with him. Elena's eyes filled with tears again. Richard lifted the guitar carefully. He asked me to teach him one last song. What song? Richard smiled. The one you played tonight. Elena stared at him. He never played it for me. He wanted to. Why didn't he? Richard looked down. Because he was afraid you'd recognize it.
Elena frowned.
Recognize what? Richard turned the guitar around. On the inside was a small piece of paper taped beneath the strings. He removed it and handed it to Elena. She unfolded it. Contained a series of handwritten notes. Not words. Music. A melody. At the bottom Daniel had written, For Elena. Elena stared at it. He wrote this. Richard nodded. The night before he died. Why? Because he wanted to give you something that wasn't connected to the accident. Elena looked at the notes. I don't understand. Richard sat down. After the accident, you stopped playing because every song reminded you of him. So Daniel wanted to write something that belonged only to you. Elena's eyes filled. He wrote me a song. Yes. And he never finished it. Richard shook his head. He finished it. Elena looked at him. Where? Richard pointed toward the guitar. The last part is inside. Elena carefully opened the guitar case. Underneath the guitar was a second sheet of music. She picked it up. The notes continued. He finished this 3 days before he died, Richard said. But he didn't have the strength to record it. Elena looked at the paper. So why didn't he give it to me? Richard looked toward Michael. Because he asked your father to wait. Until tonight. Yes. Elena shook her head. Why make it so complicated? Richard smiled sadly. Because Daniel was Daniel.
Bruno looked quietly.
That's probably the best explanation I've heard all night. Elena looked at Bruno. You knew him for 5 minutes.
Bruno smiled.
I already believe it. Richard turned to the morning after the concert. Elena woke before sunrise. But for the first time in months, she didn't wake with the familiar heaviness pressing against her chest. For a few seconds, she simply stared at the ceiling of her bedroom, listening to the quiet hum of the house, until the memories of the previous night came rushing back all at once. The empty chair, Daniel's voice on the screen, Richard's guitar, the unfinished melody, and the moment she had placed her own final notes into a song her brother had deliberately left incomplete. She reached for the folded sheet of music on the nightstand and held it against her chest. Then she noticed something else. Daniel's old notebook was sitting beside it. She had brought it home after the concert, but she didn't remember putting it there. Michael must have packed it without telling her. Elena sat up slowly and opened the notebook. The pages were filled with Daniel's handwriting, lyrics, chord progressions, little jokes, grocery lists, phone numbers, unfinished ideas, and random thoughts that seemed completely ordinary. She smiled when she found a line that read, "Remember, Elena cheats at cards and lies about it." Beneath it, someone had written, "I do not." She recognized her own handwriting. For several minutes, she turned pages without looking for anything in particular. Then she remembered what Richard had said. There was one final page. She kept turning until she reached the back of the notebook. The last page was folded inward, almost as if Daniel had intentionally hidden it. Elena's fingers trembled as she opened it. At the top were 6 words written in black ink. "There is someone you need to meet." Beneath them was a name, Sarah Carter. Elena stopped breathing. "Mom," she whispered. Her mother had died when Elena was 17. Sarah had been gone for more than a decade. Elena stared at the name, confused. Then she noticed another line underneath. "Not the person you think." She read it again. "Not the person you think." Her heart began beating faster. She turned the page, but there was nothing else. No address. No explanation. Just a small drawing of a blue door. Elena immediately thought about the black envelope. Ask Dad about the blue room. She closed the notebook and walked downstairs. Michael was already in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up when he saw her. "You're up early." Elena placed the notebook on the table. "What's Sarah Carter?" The coffee cup in Michael's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. For a long moment he said nothing. Elena watched his face. She had seen that expression before. It was the same expression he'd worn when Richard appeared at the arena. The same expression he'd worn when Daniel's final video appeared on the screen. "Dad." Michael slowly put the cup down. "Where did you find that?" "Daniel's notebook." Michael sat down. "I was hoping you wouldn't find it yet." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Yet?" Michael sighed. "I don't know how to explain this." "Try." He looked toward the window. "Sarah wasn't your mother." Elena stared at him. "What? Not the Sarah you're thinking about." "There was another Sarah?" Michael nodded. "Your mother's full name was Sarah Elizabeth Carter."
Elena frowned.
"Then who is this?" Michael looked at the notebook. "Someone Daniel met after the accident." Elena sat down. "What does she have to do with me?" Michael rubbed his forehead. "Everything." Elena felt a chill run through her. "What does that mean?" Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked toward the hallway. "Come with me." Elena followed him into a small room she had never paid much attention to. It was at the end of the hallway, behind a blue door. She stopped. "The blue room." Michael nodded. "Yes." He opened the door. The room was filled with old boxes, photographs, musical equipment, and pieces of Elena's childhood. But on one wall was something she had never seen before. A large corkboard covered with photographs. Daniel was in almost every one.
Elena stepped closer.
There were pictures of Daniel at the hospital, Daniel playing guitar, Daniel with Richard, Daniel sitting beside a young woman, and Daniel standing in front of the old piano. Elena pointed at the woman. "Is that Sarah?" Michael nodded. "Yes." "Who is she?" "She was a counselor at the rehabilitation center." Elena stared at the photograph. "Why was Daniel meeting with her?" Michael looked down. "Because he needed help."
Elena frowned.
"With what?" "With guilt." Elena looked at him. "He felt guilty?" After the accident, Daniel believed he had failed you. Elena shook her head. But he saved me. He didn't see it that way. Michael's voice softened. He thought he had ruined your life by convincing you to drive that night. Elena's eyes filled with tears. He blamed himself. Every day, Michael walked to a box. Sarah helped him understand that he couldn't spend the rest of his life punishing himself for surviving. Elena stared at the photographs. Why didn't I know about her? Because Daniel asked her not to contact you. Why? Because he was afraid you'd think he was trying to manipulate you. Elena shook her head. He was always afraid of that. Michael smiled sadly. He cared too much about what you thought. Elena looked at another photograph. Daniel was standing beside Sarah, holding a small envelope. What's that? Michael looked closely. I don't know. Elena pointed at the date written beneath the photograph. This was taken 3 days before he died. Michael's face changed. That's the day he recorded the video. Elena looked at him. So Sarah was there. Yes. And Daniel gave her something. Michael nodded. Apparently, Elena's heart began racing again. Where is she now? Michael looked toward the photograph. I don't know. Elena stared at him. You really don't know? No. But Daniel left her name. Maybe he wanted you to find her. Elena looked at the blue door. Then I'm going to. Michael nodded slowly. I thought you might. Elena turned toward him. How? Michael picked up an old folder. Daniel left an address. Elena opened it. Inside was a small card with a name and a city. Sarah Carter, Portland, Oregon. Elena stared at the address. That's all. That's all. She looked at her father. Why didn't you tell me yesterday? Because yesterday was about Daniel.
Elena smiled faintly.
And today? Michael looked at her. Today is about you. Elena folded the card carefully. I'm going. Michael nodded. I'll come with you. She shook her head. No, Elena. I need to do this. Michael looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. She hugged him. He held her tightly. I'm proud of you, he whispered. Elena closed her eyes.
I'm scared.
I know. But I'm going anyway. I know. Later that afternoon, Elena sat in the passenger seat of a car heading toward the airport. She kept Daniel's notebook on her lap. The unfinished song was tucked inside the cover. She hadn't told Bruno about Sarah yet. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because the story suddenly felt bigger than the concert. Maybe because she wanted to understand it before bringing anyone else into it. But when she checked her phone at the airport, she found a message from an unknown number. You found the blue room. Elena stared at the screen. Her heart stopped. Another message arrived. Daniel knew you would. She looked around the terminal. Thousands of people moved through the building, carrying bags, talking on phones, rushing toward gates. She typed, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a reply came. Someone who promised your brother I would wait until you were ready. Elena's hands went cold. Are you Sarah? The answer came almost immediately. Yes. Elena stood frozen in the middle of the airport. Michael looked at her. What happened? She turned the phone toward him. His expression changed. Another message appeared. Don't come to Portland yet.
Elena frowned.
Why? Sarah replied. Because there is something you need to see first. Elena stared at the message. What? The response took longer this time. A recording Daniel made the night before the accident. Elena's stomach dropped. She looked at Michael. Another recording. He shook his head. I didn't know. Sarah sent one final message. This one explains why he never told you the truth. Elena's fingers tightened around the phone. Where is it? Sarah sent an address. It wasn't in Portland. It was in Los Angeles. Elena looked at the location and realized it was only 20 minutes from the arena where they had been the night before. Dad. Michael looked at her. What? She showed him. He stared at the address. That's Richard's old studio. Elena's eyes widened. You knew? No, but Daniel knew. Michael nodded. Apparently. Elena immediately turned toward the airport exit. We're going back. Michael followed. What are you thinking? I don't know. She held the notebook against her chest. But I think Daniel left us one more piece of the puzzle. As they drove through the city, Elena called Bruno. He answered after a few rings. Hey! She smiled. The room seemed to shrink around Elena as Daniel's voice came through the old cassette player. If you ever hear this, there's something I need you to forgive me for. Static crackled between his words, and Elena instinctively reached for Bruno's hand. Not because she expected him to have an answer, but because suddenly she didn't want to stand alone. Daniel continued, I lied to you. Elena closed her eyes. Michael lowered his head. Richard stood completely still beside the old equipment, while Thomas held the blue guitar against his chest as though it were the last physical connection he had to Daniel. I told you the accident was an accident, Daniel said on the recording. And that's true, but it's not the whole truth. Elena opened her eyes. Her heart was pounding. The night we left, I wasn't just taking you home. I was going somewhere else first. The tape hissed. I had a meeting. Elena whispered. With who? Daniel's voice continued. A man named Thomas. Everyone in the room turned toward the older man standing beside the door. Thomas closed his eyes. Elena looked at him in disbelief. You? Thomas nodded slowly. Yes. Daniel continued. Thomas found me after the accident. He knew something about our family that I didn't understand. He said Mom had left something behind. Elena stared at Michael. Mom! Michael's face had gone pale. I didn't know, he whispered. Daniel continued. Dad, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I know you wanted to protect us, but I had to know why Mom disappeared from our lives so suddenly. Elena's expression changed. She didn't disappear, Michael whispered. She died. I know, Daniel's recording continued. But there were things about her death nobody told us. Elena looked at her father. What things? Michael couldn't answer. Daniel's voice became softer. I found an old letter from Mom. She wrote it before she died. She said there was something she wanted Elena and me to know when we were older. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't I ever see it? Michael finally spoke. Because I destroyed it. The room went silent. Elena slowly turned toward him. You did what? Michael's eyes filled with tears. I burned it. Why? Because I was angry. At Mom. At myself. He looked down. Your mother had been sick for months. She wanted to tell us something, but I couldn't handle another secret. When she died, I found the letter. I read it once. Then I destroyed it. Elena's voice trembled. What did it say? Michael shook his head. I don't remember every word. You remember enough. Michael looked at Thomas. She said she was afraid. Thomas nodded. She was. Elena looked between them. Afraid of what? Thomas stepped forward. Your mother believed someone had been following her.
Elena froze.
Bruno's expression hardened. Following her? Thomas nodded. She had received several anonymous calls. She thought someone was trying to scare her. Elena looked at Michael. Why didn't you tell us? Because I thought it was nothing. Michael's voice broke. Then she died. And I couldn't live with the thought that maybe I had ignored something important. Daniel's recording continued. I spent years thinking Dad was hiding something because he didn't trust us. But eventually I realized he was hiding it because he was scared. Elena looked at her father. He knew. Michael nodded. He knew I was afraid. Daniel continued. Thomas helped me understand what happened. But there was one problem. The more I learned, the more I realized Mom's story wasn't about someone trying to hurt her. It was about someone trying to protect her.
Elena frowned.
Protect her from what? The tape crackled. Daniel took a long breath. From the truth about our family. Elena stared at the cassette player. What family truth? Daniel's voice became quieter. Mom had another child. Elena's entire body went still. Michael looked at the floor. Richard covered his mouth. Thomas closed his eyes. Bruno looked at Elena. She whispered. No, Daniel continued. I know how that sounds. I didn't believe it either. But Thomas showed me the records. Elena looked at Thomas. Is that why you found Daniel? Thomas nodded. Yes. Who was the child? Thomas looked at her. A girl. Elena's breathing stopped. How old? A few years older than you. Elena stared at him. Where is she? Thomas hesitated. That's the problem. Daniel's voice returned. She was adopted when she was very young. Mom never told Dad because she believed the adoption was temporary. She planned to bring her back when she had enough money. Elena's eyes filled with tears. But she never did. Thomas nodded. She died before she could. Michael looked devastated. I didn't know. Elena turned toward him. How could you not know? Because your mother never told me. And Daniel found out? Yes. Daniel's recording continued. I found her. Elena's heart raced. You found her? Daniel said. Her name is Anna. Thomas looked at Elena. Anna is alive. Elena covered her mouth. Where? Thomas shook his head. She doesn't know who you are. Elena stared at him. Why? Because she was raised believing she was an only child. Daniel continued. I wanted to tell Elena. I wanted to bring Anna home. But I was afraid. Elena whispered. Afraid of what? Daniel answered. That Elena would think I was replacing her. Elena started crying. I would never. Her voice broke. Daniel continued. You were always afraid people would leave you. I didn't want you to think I was bringing someone else into our lives because you weren't enough. Elena looked down. Bruno gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Daniel's voice continued. Then I got sick, and everything became urgent. The recording crackled. So I made arrangements. Thomas looked toward Elena. He did. Daniel said. I asked Thomas to find Anna. I asked Richard to help me record the music. I asked Dad to protect Elena. And I asked David to bring her to the concert. Elena whispered. Why the concert? Daniel answered. Because I knew if I told her at home, she'd run. Elena laughed through tears. He knew me too well.
Bruno smiled softly.
Daniel continued. I wanted her to see that thousands of people can hear your pain and still stay. I wanted her to understand that grief doesn't make you alone. The recording became quiet for several seconds. Then Daniel said, But I couldn't tell her everything before I died. Elena stared at the cassette player. Why? Because I didn't know how. Then came a sound Elena had never expected. Daniel laughed. It was the same laugh she remembered from childhood. The one that always appeared when he knew he had made a terrible joke. I guess I was still scared of my little sister. Elena laughed through tears. Michael smiled for the first time. Daniel continued. So if you're hearing this, I need you to do something. Elena whispered. What? Meet Anna. The tape clicked. Then silence. Elena stared at Thomas. Where is she? Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. She's in Seattle. Elena looked at the picture. A young woman stood outside a small bookstore holding a coffee cup. She had dark hair, a familiar smile, and eyes that looked strangely like Elena's. That's her. Thomas nodded. Her name is Anna Miller now. Elena touched the photograph. Does she know about me? Not yet. Then what are we waiting for? Thomas smiled sadly. There's something else. Elena looked up. What? Daniel didn't want you to meet Anna until you were ready to forgive him. Elena shook her head. Forgive him for what? Thomas looked toward the cassette player. For the biggest lie of all. Elena felt the room go cold. What lie? Thomas didn't answer. Richard stepped forward. There was another reason Daniel was on that road that night. Elena looked at him. You know? Richard nodded. He was going to meet Anna. Elena's eyes widened. That night? Yes. Why didn't he tell me? Because he wanted to surprise you. Michael closed his eyes. And that's why he was rushing. Elena's mind raced. The rain. The car. Daniel's phone. The argument. He was going to meet her before he died. Thomas nodded. He had planned everything. Elena looked at the photograph again. Did he ever meet her? Thomas shook his head. No, Elena's eyes filled with tears. Then why did he say he found her? Because he found her online. He had spoken with her without telling her who he was. Elena looked confused. What did they talk about? Thomas smiled sadly. Music. Elena almost laughed. Of course. Thomas nodded. He sent her songs. She sent him recordings of herself singing. They became friends without knowing they were siblings. Elena stared at the photograph. She doesn't know. No. She thinks Daniel was just a friend? Yes. Elena's breathing became uneven. What did he call himself? Thomas smiled. He used his middle name. Elena whispered, Daniel J. Months later, Elena stood backstage at a small theater in Los Angeles, staring at a piano beneath a warm golden spotlight. The room held only a few hundred people, nothing like the 25,000 who had witnessed the night everything changed. But somehow Elena felt more nervous now. Beside her stood Anna, holding Daniel's old photograph. Michael sat in the front row, his eyes already shining with tears. Richard tuned the blue guitar while Bruno waited quietly near the piano. Tonight wasn't about a concert. It was about finishing a promise. Elena placed Daniel's original music on the piano, then added the final notes she had written herself. You ready? Bruno asked.
Elena smiled nervously.
I think so.
Bruno nodded.
That's enough. The lights dimmed. Elena walked to the piano and sat down. For a moment, she looked at the empty chair beside her. She had brought it with her, not because she needed it anymore, but because she wanted to remember. She placed her fingers on the keys and played the first notes Daniel had written. Richard joined with the blue guitar. Anna began singing softly. Then Bruno added his voice. The melody grew slowly, becoming something none of them could have created alone. Elena reached the unfinished section. She paused for half a second. Then she played the ending she had written that night in the arena. The final chord echoed through the theater. Silence followed. Then the audience stood. Elena looked at Anna, who was crying and smiling at the same time. Michael stood too, pressing one hand against his heart. Bruno walked toward Elena and whispered, "He be proud." Elena looked at the empty chair and smiled. I know. After the applause faded, Elena stepped toward the microphone. I used to think losing someone meant the end of their story, she said. But my brother taught me something different. Sometimes people leave, but what they gave you keeps moving. She looked at Anna. Sometimes it even brings people together who were supposed to find each other years earlier. Anna reached for her hand. Elena continued, Daniel didn't get to finish this song, but he left room for us. Her voice trembled. And I think that's what love does. It leaves room. The audience remained silent. Bruno smiled from behind her. Elena looked toward the empty chair one final time. So, Daniel, this one's finished. She played the last chord again. This time she didn't cry. She smiled. Months had passed since that mysterious night, but the empty chair no longer represented everything Elena had lost. It represented everything that remained. Her father, her sister, her music, her memories, her courage, and the brother who had somehow found a way to guide her toward a life he would never get to see. As the lights slowly faded, Elena closed Daniel's notebook and held it against her chest. Anna wrapped an arm around her. Bruno walked over and smiled. You know what I think?
Elena laughed.
What? Daniel still owes you a song.
Elena smiled.
No, she looked at the piano. I think he already gave me one. And as the audience continued applauding, Elena finally understood the truth she had been searching for all along. Daniel hadn't left her with an ending. He had left her with a beginning.